The alarm on my scanner screamed so loud that I dropped my toolkit and it went spinning off into the dark, tumbling away from me forever, because that is what happens when you let go of anything in orbit. I did not chase it. I could not. My eyes were locked on the reading in front of me, a heat signature coming from a sealed container that had no business being warm at all. My name is Callan, and I work salvage in the Kessler graveyard, the ring of dead machines and broken hulls that circles our planet like a wound that never healed. Nobody wanted this job. Nobody fought me for it. You float out here alone for weeks at a time, tagging debris, stripping wire, reporting anything that might fall and hurt someone below. It is quiet work. It is supposed to be safe work. That morning, it stopped being either. The container had drifted into our debris field sometime in the night, according to the logs, though nobody on the station had caught it arriving. No registry number, no beacon, no markings of any kind on the outer shell, which was strange, because even pirates usually stamp something on their crates out of habit. This one was blank, like it had been wiped clean on purpose, and it was giving off heat that should not have existed in the freezing dark of orbit. I should have called it in. I should have flagged it, and let the station commander decide what to do next, because that is the rule, and rules exist for good reasons. Instead, I clipped my tether to the nearest strut and pulled myself across empty space toward it, because curiosity has always been the one flaw that gets me into trouble, and something about that faint warmth felt less like a hazard and more like a heartbeat. The seal on the container fought me. It was built with locks I did not recognize, thick and layered, the kind of design meant to keep something in rather than keep something out. It took me almost 10 minutes with a cutting torch to crack it open, and the whole time my hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from a feeling low in my stomach that told me I was about to see something I was not ready for. When the seal finally broke and the door swung loose, I found her curled inside a bed of gel that had gone thick and sticky with age. She did not look human, not exactly, though she was close enough that in bad light, you might mistake her for one of us. Her skin held a faint shimmer to it, like the inside of a shell, and when her eyes opened, they were gold, with pupils that narrowed to thin slits against the sudden light from my helmet lamp. She flinched away from me, curling tighter into the corner of the container, and I understood in that instant that whatever had happened to her before this moment had taught her that hands reaching toward her were never a kind thing. I raised both of mine slowly, showing her my palms, and I spoke as gently as I could through my suit speaker, telling her I was not going to hurt her, telling her she was safe now, even though I had no idea if that was true. It took a long while before she let me touch her, longer still before she let me pull her free of the gel and wrap her in an emergency blanket from my kit. She weighed almost nothing. Her wrists carried marks that had healed wrong, thick ridges of scar tissue that told a story I did not want to imagine, the story of someone who had been bound for far longer than any person should ever be bound. I broke every rule I knew getting her back to my quarters instead of the station infirmary. Reporting an unknown life form meant quarantine, meant questions, meant men in hazard suits deciding what she was worth to them before anyone asked if she was hurt. I could not do that to her, not after the way she had flinched at my hands, so I hid her instead, fed her, gave her water, gave her the corner of my bunk and my spare jacket, and told my supervisor I was running an extended sweep of a debris cluster that needed careful handling. She did not speak for the first day. She watched everything I did with those gold eyes, studying my hands, my face, the way I moved around my own small space, like she was building a picture of me piece by piece, and had not decided yet whether the picture frightened her. On the second day, she finally said a word, and it was not thank you, it was a question. She asked me what I wanted, in exchange for helping her. I told her I did not want anything. She looked at me like I had spoken in a language she could not translate, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything else. By the third day, she was stronger, sitting up on her own, eating the ration bars I gave her without flinching every time I moved near. She told me her name, and I could not pronounce the full shape of the sounds, so I asked if I could call her something simpler. She thought about it and told me to call her Vess. I told her my name was Callan. She said it back slowly, testing the weight of it, the way you test ice before you trust it to hold you. I asked her nothing about where she had come from. It felt wrong to pry into a wound while it was still open, and she carried the kind of silence that told me she would speak when she was ready and not before. Instead, we talked about small things. I told her about the graveyard, about the dead satellites and broken ships I spent my days cataloging. She asked question after question about ordinary life, about food, about weather, about why I had chosen to spend my time alone in the cold, instead of somewhere warmer, with more people around me. I told her I liked the quiet. She said quiet was something she had not been allowed in a very long time. On the fourth day, she looked at me across the small table in my quarters and said something that has stayed with me every day since. She said I had never once asked what she was worth. Not her name, not her rank, not what price she might carry if I turned her over to someone with the right resources. She said where she came from. Worth was the first question anyone asked about anyone else, and I had never asked it at all. I told her that the only worth that mattered to me in that moment was that she was alive and hurting, and that was reason enough to help her. She did not answer right away. She just watched me with an expression I could not read, something between disbelief and a kind of ache, like I had handed her a truth she did not know what to do with. On the fifth day, the sky broke apart. I was running a routine scan from the observation deck when the alarm started, not the small chirp of a debris warning, but the deep, station-wide klaxon that meant something enormous had entered our airspace. I rushed to the window and watched as shapes began to resolve out of the black, one after another, each one larger than the last, until the largest of them blotted out a section of stars entirely. Our sensors could not classify a single one of them. Every threat catalog we had came back empty, because nothing in our records had prepared us for ships built on this scale. The station commander was screaming into every channel we had, demanding identification, demanding someone explain what was happening, and for a long, terrible minute, nobody had an answer. Then every screen on the station lit up at once with a single translated message, and the voice behind it stopped my heart cold, because I knew it. I had spent 5 days listening to that voice grow stronger in the quiet of my own quarters. The message was short. It said to stand down, and it said that the man who had sheltered their sovereign was not to be harmed under any circumstance. My name was not spoken, but I did not need it spoken. I understood exactly who they meant. I stood frozen at the window as a smaller shuttle broke away from the largest of the ships and began its descent toward our platform, moving with a grace that made our own vessels look like clumsy toys by comparison. Around me, the station fell into a kind of stunned, frightened silence, everyone staring at the same impossible sight, nobody quite able to process what they were seeing. When the airlock finally cycled open, Vess stepped through it, and she was not wearing my spare jacket anymore. She wore something that seemed woven from light itself, folds of fabric that shifted color as she moved, and behind her walked a line of figures who carried themselves with a discipline that made it clear they had trained their entire lives to stand exactly 2 steps behind her and never any closer. Nobody on the station moved. Nobody breathed. I think even the station commander forgot how to speak. And she walked straight past all of them, past the officers who had rushed to form some kind of welcoming line, past the security personnel who did not know whether to raise their weapons or lower their heads, and she stopped directly in front of me. Up close, the transformation was almost impossible to believe. The frightened, starving woman I had pulled from a sealed container 5 days earlier now stood in front of me with the bearing of someone who commanded worlds, and yet her eyes, when they met mine, held the exact same gold warmth they always had. She told the room, in a voice that carried without needing to be raised, that I had asked her for nothing, that I had not questioned what she was, had not calculated what she might be worth, had simply seen that she was hurt, and had chosen to help. She said this like it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever witnessed, and looking at the faces around us, faces full of confusion and awe, I began to understand that where she came from, an act that simple, truly was rare enough to be extraordinary. She explained, with the whole station listening in stunned silence, exactly what had happened to her. She was the sovereign of an empire that spanned more star systems than I had numbers to count, a vast alliance of worlds known as the Thren Ascendancy. During a period of political unrest, a rival faction within her own court had staged an uprising, seizing her in the chaos and sealing her inside that container as leverage, a bargaining piece to be used or discarded, depending on how the coup unfolded. When their plans collapsed, and the danger of being caught with her grew too great, her captors had panicked and jettisoned the container into the nearest debris field they could find, hoping it would drift forever among the wreckage of a world too small and too distant to matter. They had not expected a lone salvage worker to catch a heat signature that should not have existed and refused to let it go unexamined. She told them that in 3 days, with the backing of the fleet now gathered above our small world, she intended to return home and reclaim her throne from the faction that had betrayed her. She said this with a calm certainty that left no room for doubt, and looking at the ships hanging silently above us, I understood that no one in that room, human or otherwise, had any power to stop her, even if they had wanted to. Then she turned back to me, and the vast weight of everything she had just said seemed to fall away for just a moment, leaving only the two of us standing there, the way we had stood in my small quarters days before. She told me that her people were taught from birth to measure every interaction, to weigh cost against gain before extending even the smallest kindness, because in a court built on ambition, softness was treated as weakness, and weakness was treated as an invitation. She said that was how her people had survived for generations. Then, quieter, she added that it was also how they had slowly lost themselves along the way, trading warmth for caution, until an entire empire forgot how to simply be kind, without expecting something in return. I asked her, mostly because I did not know what else to say, and because the fear in my chest needed somewhere to go, whether this meant our little world was now safe from whatever storms moved through galactic politics. She did not smile exactly, but something steadier and colder settled over her features, something that looked like a promise being sealed into place. She told me that our world was no longer simply safe, it was hers to protect, and she made it clear that this was a very different thing, a thing I would never need to understand through hardship, because she intended to make certain of that herself. Before she left, she asked if she could speak with me alone, away from the crowd of officers and guards who still did not quite know how to hold themselves in her presence. We stepped into a small side room, and for a moment, she was not a sovereign of an entire empire. She was only the woman I had spent 5 days sharing quiet meals with, asking me simple questions about a life she had never been allowed to live. She told me that in her culture, a debt like the one she owed me was not something that could be repaid with wealth or titles, because those things meant nothing next to what I had given her freely when I had every reason not to. She told me that a rescue given without calculation was the rarest gift her people knew, and that she intended to honor it in a way that mattered, not with ceremony, but with protection that would never announce itself and never demand recognition. I told her I had not saved her expecting anything at all, and she said that was exactly why she intended to give it anyway. 3 days later, true to everything she had promised, the great ships assembled themselves into formation above our small world and began to move, folding away into the dark toward home, toward whatever confrontation awaited her among the faction that had once locked her away and thrown her out like nothing more than debris. I watched from the same observation deck where I had first seen her ships arrive, and I felt something in my chest that I could not quite name, part fear for what she was walking into, part something warmer that I did not have the courage to examine too closely. She did not send messages after that. No announcements came through our channels. No diplomatic envoys arrived to formalize whatever arrangement had been struck between our small world and an empire most of us still could barely comprehend. Life on the station slowly returned to something like normal, though nothing about it ever truly felt the same again, not after what we had all witnessed. What did change, quietly and without fanfare, was the graveyard itself. Ships began to appear at the very edge of our system, distant shapes that our sensors could barely register, holding position far enough away that they never interfered with a single vessel, never announced themselves, never demanded anything from anyone. They simply stayed there, watching, a silent presence that made every salvage worker on our station feel, for the first time in years, that the emptiness around us was no longer quite so dangerous. I kept working the graveyard after that, because it was the only life I had ever known, and because leaving felt like abandoning the place where everything had changed. Some nights, drifting among the wreckage with my tether clipped to some rusted strut, I would look toward the edge of the system where those distant ships waited, and I would wonder if she ever thought about the 5 days she had spent in a cramped set of quarters, eating ration bars and asking questions about a life so much smaller than the one she had returned to. I never found out what became of the faction that had betrayed her, whether her return to the throne had been swift, or whether it had cost her more than she ever let show in front of me. She never spoke of it, not in the brief and rare moments afterward, when a shuttle would descend without warning, and she would step out just long enough to see how the graveyard was faring, always calm, always composed, but always with that same gold warmth in her eyes, whenever she looked my way. She told me once, during one of those visits, that she had changed the way her court operated after reclaiming her throne. She said she had begun asking a different question of the people who served her, not what someone was worth, but whether they were well, whether they needed anything, whether kindness had a place in a room that had spent generations believing it did not. She told me the change had not been easy, that old habits carved deep into a culture do not vanish overnight, but she said it had begun, and she said it had begun because of 5 quiet days spent in a small metal room with a man who never once thought to ask what she was worth before deciding to help her. I think about that a lot, out here in the cold and the dark, surrounded by the broken remains of things nobody wanted anymore. I think about how easy it would have been to walk past that container, to file a report, and let someone else deal with the strange heat signature drifting through our debris field. I think about how close I came to leaving her there, sealed inside something meant to erase her, simply because it was not my job to open it. But I did open it. I did reach in, without asking what waited on the other side, without calculating what it might cost me, or what I might gain. I only saw someone hurting, and I helped, because that has always felt like the only reasonable thing to do when someone in front of you is in pain. She became the queen of an empire that spans more stars than I will ever count in my lifetime, and somewhere out past the edge of our small, quiet system, her ships still watch over a graveyard full of broken things nobody else remembered to protect. I do not know what the future holds, for her empire, or for the strange, unlikely bond we share across the vast distance between our worlds. But I know this much for certain: kindness given without expecting anything in return has a way of finding its way back to you, sometimes in the smallest whisper, and sometimes, as I learned on that 5th impossible day, wearing the light of an entire empire behind it.